Hello, my name is Inigo, and today we'll be talking about my tanking build for Asylum Sectorium. First we'll talk about my gear, then we'll talk about my attributes, then skills, then my champion points, and consumables, and then finally I'll do some closing thoughts on race, on vamp, and maybe some other things. So starting with the gear, now I run 5-piece Turok packed on my body. I run Alkosh jewelry, sword and board, and then I run a Maelstrom lightning staff on my back bar. We'll talk about that when we go into skills. Then I run Earth Core as my monster set. Now I run Turok's patch because it's pretty standard setup for tanks. Get your uptime on your enchantments really high, which is great. Turok's or Alkosh for the resistance debuff that it applies, which is really great. And then Earth Core. I would probably say you should run Earth Core in Asylum, considering what you're able to do with it and what it does for your teammates. People might want to run Engine Guardian, which is fine. It's a little bit more selfish. Same thing with Lord Warden, and same thing with Bloodspawn. That's the reason why I don't run any of them over Earth Core in Asylum, because this allows you to benefit your group as well as benefit yourself by a lot. An example of how I use Earth Core. Say I need to res someone, right? What I would do is throw an orb, then I go over there, I res, and then while I'm resing, say I take a lot of damage, then the Earth Core procs and heals me, and it potentially heals them. An example of when you want to do that is during execute, during fire phase, is a great time to get a res off if you need. Now we're going to talk about the traits I choose. Now, I wouldn't recommend going full sturdy like I have set up here in Asylum Sectorium, because you aren't taking damage on your block cooldown, even close, not even close. So I would probably recommend going full infused and maybe sprinkle a little bit of well fitted in there. That will help a lot if you like to roll dodge the light attacks that Ohms does. Other than that, you could pretty much run whatever you want. Your jewelry, you know, you're just given that. The weapons infused on both of them, you know, so on. And so for the traits, or sorry, for the enchantments I choose, I recommend going full HP. However, doing 3 tri-enchants is pretty useful if you want a bit more magic, and that's kind of what I chose for this particular fight, is to have a bit more magic here. Other than that, everything else is, this should be HP. I don't know why it's, you know, I think I just forgot to enchant that. But everything else should be HP. That way you have more stats. This is also try. Alright, one thing that I almost forgot to talk about was my enchantments that I choose on my jewelry and my weapons. Weapons, obviously you want to do Crusher, which is great. And then for my jewelry, this is probably the most variable that people can come up with. Resistance on my neck I chose so that I get a little bit more physical resist, which is the type of damage you need to be mitigating the most. I was doing 2 and I played with it, didn't really like it that much, so I ended up going with 2 magic reduced cost enchantments here. That way I can use my other abilities a lot more, and that way I can help support the group. Now we can talk about alternatives. I did talk about alternatives for monster set. However, alternatives for your body, you can run Ebon if you want. I wouldn't recommend Ebon because the uptime on everyone will be lower than it would be if the off-tank ran it. You could run SPC here instead of Alkosh. That's not a bad idea. We did that in the beginning of our progression, and I used Blood Altar to keep that to keep it up, and it got decent uptime. You could run Plague Doctor. I wouldn't recommend Plague Doctor. Honestly, I would insist that you run at least Turok's packed on a tank in Asylum Sectorium. Other than that, that's pretty much the standard setups. We could talk about my attributes now. Deltia's gaming videos. Big reason why I think that talking about attributes is good. He always said that people ask him that a lot, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that before they ask me. 64 HP, obviously. The reason why I do that is because of what they did to your DK passives, namely your Earth and Heart ones, Battle Roar, and Helping Hands. They kind of made it to where that scales off of your character level instead of your max stats. So having really high stamina or really high magic is not as useful as it used to be. And that kind of just goes with you know, the game changing. Next, we can talk about our skills that we choose. Firstly, let's go over my front bar. Pretty standard: Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Engulfing, Igneous, Balance, Aggressive Horn. This is obvious. Keep taunt, keep debuffed, keep your ult genning here. That's what's really nice about this. The maim is also really good. If it didn't have maim, I would still run it for the heroism. Engulfing Flames is for the 10% more damage that the boss receives from fire damage, which your DDs should be running Wall, Firewall, Fire Deal, and their light attack should be doing fire damage because they're using Fire Staff, so it'll increase your group damage by a pretty marginal amount. This main reason why DK should use this isn't necessarily for the shield. It's mostly for the ult gen that you get from this passive right here. 3 ult every 6 seconds. So you should be using that at least once every 6 seconds. And then balance for your magic sustain and for your major buffs. It's important to keep track of the balance debuff. For example, I have it right there at the bottom. It says my balance will runs out. So what I'll do is I balance, I wait for it to run out or almost run out, Igneous Shield, swap bars, boom, I heal myself a lot. So then Horn, back bar, we've got Inner Rage. I would recommend the Magic Morph over the Stam, considering the Stam Morph, you already have a Stam Taunt, and this one is way cheaper than what this one would be if it was Stam. Next skill is Blockade of Storms. This is for the off balance, 2 things that are concussed. That way people can take that or do that increased damage, and that way people can get their resources off of the heavy attacks. However, I think that the debuff for off balance should be increased to like 8 seconds instead of 5, because trying to get a heavy attack off in a 5-second time while you're also trying to do other things like survive Storm of Heavens, for example, is really hard to do, especially considering the duration of some of the heavy attack channels, like Fire Staff, for example. You'd have to start right as it's going off if you wanted to get that off while you're doing Asylum Sectorium. Next skill is Green Dragon Blood. This is my main heal. I use it mainly because it makes my character invisible, which is cool, or see-through, but it also gives me some cool buffs and some cool heals. Then I use energy orbs, and I use this 90% of the time to proc Earth Core on people or myself, but it's also nice for people to use the synergies to get some resources back, and it's also good to kind of heal them, you know, like throw out 3 or 4, like spam them like that, and then all of a sudden people got resources and people got like, you know, a few HP here and there, because let's say they have 20k HP, right? That probably heals for like 500 each tick. Yeah, there it is. That's a decent amount of 20k, 500, you know, half of 1k. Get them up, you know, it takes every, what, 40 seconds or something like that, so that's not bad at all. Then finally I run Efficient Purge. I run this for 2 reasons. During Execute, you can purge off the debuff, the fire debuff. During Storm of Heavens, you can purge off the Storm of Heavens debuff, which makes you take increased damage from the next Storm of Heaven hits. And then my ult I run on that bar is Magma Shell. I rarely use it. I don't recommend using it unless you need to. Horn is always better. That way you can give people back some stats, or give them some stats, and then give them some major force, which is great. Oh, by the way, this is a Mapper's add-on, which is really great. It tracks anytime a horn is used in a trial group, even if you don't get it, so that you can see when to horn next, even if you don't have it. So that's skills. Next we talk about champion points. We'll start with the red tree, 72 Ironclad. I can't stress more about this, considering the type of damage you take in every trial. That is something you should worry about. Is always going to be direct damage. The only thing that's threatening is direct damage for a tank, and 72 Ironclad gives you crazy amount of mitigation of that damage. In Asylum Sectorium, you're taking mostly physical damage, so I run a few more points in a Hardy than I would normally in anything else, and I run points into Heavy Armor Focus, which I wouldn't normally do it anywhere else. As far as what you do with these two things, I would say that's very arbitrary. You could consider running more into here if you wanted. However, that's mostly up to you. The only things that I would recommend to really optimize and really get buffed up is Ironclad, Hardy, and Heavy Armor Focus. As far as the green's concerned, the 3 things that I would put points into is Warlord. Wait, no, 4 things. Warlord, Tenacity, Tumbling, and Shadow Ward. Shadow Ward, I put almost 100 points into. Tumbling, though that doesn't have any jump points, so you can put in whatever you want. And then Tenacity, I believe, has a jump point. Might be wrong. And then this, I just put how many points I can into it. As far as the blue tree goes, until you start wanting to do damage as a tank, it doesn't matter besides 2 things. That's going to be Tactician and Healing, because you have a heal and you want that to do better, and you can also heal people with other things. And the Tactician is great because you set them off balance. As a side note, I wish this would say what that duration for off balance would be, like it says in other places. It should say set them off balance for 5 seconds like it does everywhere else, just to be more consistent. However, I don't think it matters that much. But anyways, that's my CP for Asylum Sectorium. Next thing we talk about the consumables I use: tripods, and then tri-food, which is going to give me some increased primary stats, and then I give my all 3 stats when I use a pot, which is great. Those are just, you know, pretty standard things. As far as like vampire or not, or werewolf or not, definitely not do werewolf. There's no reason to ever do werewolf, because the only benefit it gives you when you're not in werewolf form is some regen. If you have the ults on your bar, and the regen gives you stam regen, which you don't gain while you're blocking with a sword and board. So you choose vamp. That way you get the undeath passive. But, you know, not only that, actually, I would say you don't choose Vamp for that. That is passive as dog shit. You choose Vamp so that you can use Invigorating Drain on certain fights. Literally, that's, if I were to have to validate why I'm a Vamp, I would say I want to use that skill sometimes. The Undeath is good. Most of the time you won't be at, you know, 10% health and get hit and then not die because you have this passive. If you get to that low of HP, you're going to go from 70 to 10%, which won't get mitigated by this passive. So like, it's mostly about using the skill in certain trials. Other than that, that's pretty much that. Racial, I choose Imperial for only one reason, and that's the increase EXP I gain from Sword and Board. And that means that when I leveled this character, I was able to put a shield on faster. I was able to get that skill line to 50 faster, and which meant I can start tanking trials a lot faster. And that's why I chose that passive. And that's the only passive I think that Imperial has over everything else. Because like max health is, you know, whatever, you can get that from other places. Stamina, whatever, red diamond. It's actually a really interesting passive because you can proc that to heal yourself, and then it could also proc Earthcore, which I have done several times. Talking about the other races, you've got Argonian as a competitor, and you've got Nord as a competitor. Argonian, they have the Resto Staff increase. EXP gain, so obviously they're a healer race by Zos's perspective, and Nord is really bad. I don't really know what else to say besides they are really bad. The passive they gain that decreases the amount of damage they take turns out, once you have your CP set up, once you have a lot of mitigation, to almost less than 1%. I did a really like mediocre mitigation setup on this website that Paul Simon made, or I believe he made it, and the difference between Imperial and Nord in that case was 1.5% from a 10k hit, which why not gain that passive that gives you more EXP to Sword and Board Shields skill blind, right? Other than that, that's pretty much all I have to talk about. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll help you where I can. Message me on Discord, in game. Hop into TeamSpeak if you want. I still use that. And you guys have a wonderful day.